we're trying to do really architecting, or are we actually addressing the issues in scaling?
I think if we view architecting as a continuous process, then we cannot also dissociate architecting from scaling, because scaling is also a dimension of it, and it's part of the process, because the aim of the architecture is to evolve through scaling and also extending the scope and so forth.
That's good. Professor Moderator, how much longer do I have? I've got a few more questions. But
Yeah, 15 more minutes,
yeah,
please.
good. Great. Okay,
Oh.
so just before we leave this, because it's so important, I want to kind of pick up on Sasha's question, really. So I think this deserves some further development in terms of the model, and it might be via design science, it might be via another approach. But what are your plans for developing this and maybe taking it to generalizing it to other contexts outside HIS? Do you have any?
I had some discussions with my supervisors, but also with other people in this room here about extending this model, but so far I don't have a clear plan about what we proceed exactly with this model.
Because I think, as one of your opponents, I have to say, I think it's a very nice model, and I would kind of say that it being nice and potentially of social value, you kind of owe it to everybody to take it the next stage in development and think about how it might apply beyond that context. Because I think there are lots of design methodologies, we know that. To the extent that this is one that addresses scaling, that's quite a unique contribution. Okay, Agile doesn't address scaling in that sense. SSM doesn't really focally address scaling. You have an architecting, a design methodology here that could potentially help people to scale, and that's a very unique contribution that you've made, I think, potentially. And you've taken a knowledge management framework, which is not particularly known, and you've introduced it into this domain in a way that could help other people. And I think that's really to be praised, but I think it's also, there's a challenge there as well, I think, for you in terms of going forward, in terms of what you might do with it and how you might help people with it. So I think that's just one to kind of think about maybe and take away. There were a couple of final question on this model. There were a couple of points in the thesis where I just when we were getting into the detail of the different case studies, where I thought, I'm just going to ask Eden to talk me through this. Okay, so and my point is, to those that have had a look at it, that there are different countries that have been involved here. And I'm going to pick Gambia and Burkina Faso. Okay, and so what you've done is you've taken the reader through how you applied it, and you've talked about different configurations of these layers. Right. So I'm going to quickly read them, and you'll see, people probably see why I want you to talk about them a bit more. We're just going to take these two. Okay. So in the Gambia, you said the resulting architecture was characterized by autonomy and heterogeneity at the pragmatic boundary, by monolithic and minimal metadata at the semantic boundary, and by a monolithic reporting tool integrated in DHIS2. Okay, so that's the Gambia. And in Burkina Faso, you said, at the syntactic and semantic boundaries, all stakeholders' needs were covered through maximalist and monolithic reporting forms and metadata documents, whereas at the pragmatic boundary, there was heterogeneity and autonomy. Now, for a strange reader like me coming at this cold, I had to kind of do this with my specs a bit. So I wonder if you could just kind of maybe take everybody through what it is you're trying to say, and I'm not dismissing it. I think you're quite rightly saying that this needs you to understand the situation in a structured way and to understand what those differences are. And maybe you could talk us through that, and if you want to refer to the thesis too.
For instance, in Gambia, they were using this minimal dataset approach. So meaning that they have a small list of indicators in one reporting form, which is supposed to serve the need of everybody. It's a kind of one size fits all. So that's this small list of indicators, and that reporting form is what I refer to as monolithic reporting forms. So it's like one integrated, one rigid and compact.
Is back to my earlier question, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because when you say monolithic, that's a kind of disparaging word, that's a bad thing. Is that right? Or because again, at least you had some agreement.
Yeah, but the idea is that, in fact, that was not something what is the pragmatic boundary, because of this power structure, it was imposed on stakeholders. But in practice, they did not agree with it, and that's why it didn't successfully evolve. And that goes back to the notion of congruence as well, because that monolithic indicators and reporting tools is not that you have at semantic level, is not reflecting what is at pragmatic.
So monolithic is good if you have agreement at pragmatic level, and it's a bad thing if you don't have agreement.
No, the idea is, if you have, at the pragmatic boundary, you have monolithic like this, like you have one power structure, one command center, and only one person in command, and you have monolithic at semantic level, then it's okay. But you have heterogeneity and autonomy at the pragmatic boundary, and you have monolithic at the semantic boundary, then there's no congruence, and that's bad for the successful evolution of the.
But I guess you might have a group of people who agree.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So it's not one person, but it's a group of people who agree with the monolithic structure, in which case you're okay as well.
Yeah, even in that case, because it is monolithic, then it will be harder to get that monolithic things evolve. But if you have, if there are many with their different interests, even if they are great, what we have at semantic level should reflect that one, but also be a kind of modular way, so that if there is a change with one subset of the group, we can easily address that instead of having to renegotiate the whole. So that's.
I'm really pleased with what you've just been saying, because I don't know if it strikes anybody else, but you've almost been talking like a kind of manual of how to do scaling using this tool. You could kind of write that. You've just been saying, if you have a situation where, then you have this. If you have this situation, you might think about doing this. There's a beginning of a paper right there. It's a great, people would look at that and go, I can actually address some real practical issues. And because the problem is, I think for a lot of people, myself included, when I first read this, it's just a model, right? Another academic model, so what? But I think what you've done is you've demonstrated with different case study situations how the configuration of these levels was different, and what you did about it as a result, and in turn, what you've just been saying now, what that tells us about how we actually manage this process of scaling. Fantastic, I think. Okay, one or two more questions then. So in paper 4, we talk about Capacity Plus. Yeah? Do you want to just tell everybody what Capacity Plus is, or who they are, just as a full question?
Capacity Plus is a project funded by USAID to develop the human resource information system.
And you describe Capacity Plus, can't remember page number, as an attractor, right? Is that your word? What's an attractor? I should have found the page number. I guess I didn't write that. One of the ones I didn't write down. So you talk about the word attractor in a way that it coalesces networks. So maybe you're way out of my question, is to think about some of the platform ecosystem literature that we were talking about in your presentation. But I read the word attractor, and I didn't know what that was. I suspect the literature is using another word for attractor, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think attractor, I don't think I use attractor for the capacity plus. It was for his.
So how did you use the word attractor? I think you used it in terms of coalescing networks, though.
Yes, it's attractor here is like a component around which radio system, complex system stabilized.
And is that your word?
Mm-hmm.
Is that your word? Attractor?
I mean, that's how I see attractor.
But I guess my question is, so if I was a reviewer,
Yeah.
and you talked about the word attractor, it sounds like you're using it in a specific technical sense. So I would say, is that a construct that you're using? And in which case, where does it come from? Is it your
it comes from the complexity science.
Okay, great.
Complex
He totally nailed me on that question, right? I haven't read the complexity science, and I don't know about attraction. I really wish I hadn't asked that. Okay, we're getting towards the end. This is probably a good thing because we're starting to nail me now. So I think mindfulness, I think, was a very interesting thing that you brought up, and the reference is Viking Sutcliffe, obviously. And I wanted to, again, come back to where I started from in terms of this tension, okay, between top-down and bottom-up. Top-down things, control, bottom-up, process, and heterogeneity, okay? So what struck me, and there's no reason you should have seen this unless you happen to be looking at it, but there's been some recent work in the institutional translation literature on how you transfer practices from one organisation to another. Okay, and they point to a paradox, which I think is quite interesting. And I think you kind of refer a little bit to this. So the paradox is, if you're transferring something top down to somebody else and you want to scale a way of doing things, or a set of practices which have information systems embedded in them, you want people to be mindful, right? Which is why you want people to think about the local appropriateness of those practices, systems, etc., so that they can use them properly. Yeah, they can, the seed germinates on the ground. You don't want them to just tick the boxes, right? Just because you don't have mindful work going on. And I like the way you talked about mindfulness. But you don't want them to be too mindful and say, this is a load of crap. Okay, I'm not accepting it. Do you see what I mean? So, and you were kind of talking a little bit, quite rightly, about, you weren't talking about the paradox, but you made me think of that paradox in the institutional translation literature, which is, again, you want mindfulness, but you don't want rejection, right? I just wondered if you recognize that picture in some of the work that you did, because you did talk about mindfulness. And maybe tell everybody about sort of, why did you put in the Viking Sutcliffe reference and the mindfulness, and is that tension something that you recognise?
Yeah, I mean, here when I was talking about mindfulness, it was also to mitigate or to stress the needs of just not taking everything for granted and seeing everything as a black box, or also trying to normalize everything, or being blind from some abnormal things happening or something that are challenging, trying to just say this is not normal and then keep continue, because that's small things that will challenge us, or that's you can see as not normal, can lead to big disaster. So if we want to, for instance, to adopt one system. We need, of course, to be mindful of everything. So if there are some issues that are raised, we don't just have to say, okay, this is, so we normalize them, or we say, okay, this is just not normal, and then we keep it aside. We need to take it into account. So, and that's also goes back to the issue of serendipity. So being able to be mindful of whatever happens in the backgrounds and to see how we can exploit them. If it's a big problem, then we have to address them. Otherwise, it will lead to a bigger problem tomorrow. Or if it's something not normal, so we investigate it and see if it has some potentials either of solving problem or for doing new things.
Okay, nice. Well, my final question, three, is to zoom right back out again and say that I think a lot of our discussion now has been around that, again, managing that tension. Okay, top down, bottom up, process, entity, homogeneity, heterogeneity, dealing with variation. You know, they're all different versions of the same paradox, really, and we just ended with the mindfulness one as well. So, as I understand it, it's still a big issue for HIS and the future of HIS to scale. Still, isn't it? Or else, if we can't scale, then we're always just fiddling around in the weeds. So we need to scale. But how do you, given everything that all the experience you've had, the thinking you've done about this sort of model, the kind of tensions, how is it possible to scale HIS in the future, in some ideal future, okay, so that it really, really kind of works, we can roll it out really easily, whilst preserving the mindfulness, the locality, the bottom-up democratic engagement, access. On the one hand, to scale, we need to black box. We have to. But on the other hand, if we black box, then maybe we don't get so much agreement. And therefore we lose the mindfulness, and we've ended up just building a piece of useless technology.
I mean, there have been some works, for instance, by the Hansel suggesting some alternative approach to handle the needs of democracy, participatory participation, and so forth, but also with the ability of being able to do things and move quickly. And they have, for instance, suggested that trying to bring a big number of, a big group of stakeholders or end users into the design of the system will not work, because that will escalate the political complexity of the process. But still, we need to have a small, very small group of users that can provide insight into the process, but also have a small management team that can be flexible and keen to innovate, try new ideas without having to delve into political discussion in order to agree on the next step. So I think that can also help in mitigating the tension between associating people, users, and making sure that their voices are heard, and also the needs to move forward.
Edith, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you much for your contributing to the discussion of the academic thesis. Does anyone want to speak ex auditory? Surprisingly not. Then the committee will actually withdraw, and you all will sit put, and we will come to the back. So please come with me.
You're going to the committee? Oh, yeah.
very beneficial to me.
It's always interesting. It's tough. Interesting doesn't mean it's easy. It's not
Oh, sorry.
getting there. Yes, the thing was we've been doing things when I was supposed to say things. Like architecting, which you have things.
But that's researching, kind of constructing what you've been doing for a long time. So it's kind of come up with variables which you claim that you are the first one. It's always
Okay, we're back.
about
So then, the very proper question is then to ask the first opponent on behalf of the committee. Did you find Adam's answering satisfactory?
Yes.
And then there's only one thing to do, is to celebrate Adam. And on behalf of the department, I will give you a little gift from the department and the flowers. And then we all can give a big hand to Adam. Invited to come up to the 6th floor to celebrate, and now I am allowed, because now I'm not so formal anymore, to celebrate Mr. West Africa, as he's called, because he's from all over. No, all over, but he represents West Africa in a fantastic way today. And we are so proud.
Dr. West Africa. Not Mr.
Doctor.
You are here, you are not there. That's the difference. I have a little something for both of you. Okay, then will you know what it is? This is for you. Oh, thanks. And this is,
Yeah, they ask a question.
Because it's very soon leave, so we can celebrate a little more.
John is not the only person from West Africa.
I know, but you're not finished. You're not a doctor. Right? He's a star.
Yeah.
This is also West Africa.
He's my son.
You're a baby.